or putting up some bunting, getting a bit of Snoop Dogg playing, and having a bit of a street party. I just really love the idea, and hopefully it all goes ahead and communities make the most of it, Jackie. Thanks for being with us.
No problems at all. My pleasure.
And I would love to know: do you do street parties? Text me 2101 because that is one thing I would love to do this year. Nick Leggett, Julie Woods, you've both been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
really
Wallace.
cool.
Thank you, Wallace. Been fun.
Julie.
Very cool.
Thank you,
Thanks
Nick.
to Ayana, the producer. I am Wallace Chapman. I'm back tomorrow when the horns hit. That's 3:45 for now. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, voodoo costings and heroic calculations. The allegations fly as National unveils its $14.6 billion tax package for the so-called squeezed middle. How much could you get and at what cost? Nicola Willis is live. Fears a child could be killed as they compete to steal the most cars in Christchurch, hooking up via virtual groups, live streaming and posting their potentially fatal antics. The flood-prone Auckland street where one resident is opting for stilts rather than gumboots, and the cost of living crisis closes a small rural school as parents can no longer fill the petrol tank. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Lei Atawa tēnei. Labour is accusing National of coming up with a fantasy land tax plan that does not add up. The opposition party's unveiled its plan to deliver extra income to what it calls the squeezed middle, promising to ease the cost of living for New Zealand households. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The back pocket boost would be delivered through changes to income tax thresholds, other credits and a childcare rebate. That and reversing other taxes imposed by Labour would cost just over $14.5 billion over 4 years. Savings of roughly the same amount would be made through spending cuts and new targeted taxes. Labour's questioning the amount a national government would actually be able to raise, while raising the alarm over its proposed public service cuts. National's unapologetic, saying there's waste to be found and its plan stacks up.
Christchurch police say children as young as 8 are behind a surge of car thefts around the city in the past few months. Most are done by 11 to 12-year-olds, often leading to serious crashes. Superintendent Lane Todd says nearly 60 cars were stolen over one weekend as two groups competed to steal the most.
My personal biggest fear is that they're going to be involved in a fatal crash and an innocent party will be killed. We've had some close calls in relation to some serious crashes, but thankfully we've had no one killed yet. But that's my biggest fear.
Lane Todd says many of the children had not been at school post-pandemic. Two men have been charged with organising fights between teens in their care at an Auckland youth justice facility. The pair, aged 22 and 23, appeared in the Manukau District Court today, charged with ill-treating a child. Emma Stanford reports.
Last month, 11 Oranga Tamariki staff were stood down after a video surfaced of two young men punching and kicking each other at Korowaimanaki in Wiri, South Auckland. 4 of the employees were suspended in relation to that footage, taken in June. Police are not ruling out further charges. Korowaimanaki is the same Auckland facility where youth spent the night on the roof last month.
Wellington Free Ambulance says mental illness in the community is reaching almost pandemic-like proportions. People calling 111 in mental distress will soon be met by a joint response involving police, mental health professionals, ambulance officers and, in some cases, iwi. Wellington Free Ambulance Chief Executive Dave Robinson says their service has been involved in the scheme pilot and its benefits have been shown. An advocate says migrants tied to employers under investigation for potential fraud should not have been turned away at the New Zealand border. 10 migrants have been stopped over the past 2 weeks, and almost 200 would-be migrants are being told not to travel here. Migrant Workers Association spokesperson Anu Kaloti says they shouldn't be punished.
We don't agree with this action of turning people away at the border, since they have invested so much, and they are effectively being punished for something that they have not done.
More than 400 Ports of Auckland workers are being paid a bonus after a strong financial year for the company. Chief Executive Roger Gray says $125,000 will be paid out in bonuses to reflect the work of staff and what the port calls its regaining our mana strategy. Hurricane Idalia is gathering strength as it moves north across the Gulf of Mexico, with winds reaching 175 kilometres an hour. It's expected to soon make landfall in Florida. Will Ulrich from the US National Weather Service explains why it's getting more powerful.
So both the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean are experiencing some of the warmest water temperatures in recorded history. The fuel for hurricanes is warm water.
There's been extensive flooding in western Cuba. To sport, and the Tall Blacks are embracing their underdog status ahead of tonight's must-win final group match against Greece at the Basketball World Cup. The winner will advance to the second round in Manila, with the loser to play in classification games. Coach Pero Cameron is realistic about their chances of upsetting the world number 9 ranked team, but he says the Tall Blacks have a style of play that could trouble the Greeks.
There's a lot of things we need to improve, and the players and group is very aware of our plan. We go about it ruthlessly to achieve that plan. That's what sport is. It doesn't always go to plan, but we adjust on the fly.
On the eve of the first T20 game against England, Black Caps captain Tim Southee says any cricket is good cricket in the build-up to the World Cup. The two sides meet in the first game at Chester Lee Street tomorrow morning, with the 50-over World Cup in India just over a month away. Southee says no matter the format, there are principles that will always benefit a side.
Any cricket is good cricket in the lead into the World Cup. There's still plenty of cricket between now and the start of the World Cup. I think it's about trying to play your best cricket whenever you're going out on the field to represent New Zealand. So I don't think that will change in this series or in the lead into the World Cup.
Meanwhile, businessman and former Wellington first-class cricketer Scott Wennick has been appointed Chief Executive of New Zealand Cricket. Wennick replaces David White, who stepped down from the role earlier this month. That's the news.
A Black Power family settles down in mongrel mob turf.
They're just trying to stop us and see who's in the truck. Throw things at us. I just ignored it for the safety of myself and my children.
An 80-year-old man fights on after his home burns down.
I'm not going to feel defeated. I'm not going to be bowed down by it. I'll consider it a challenge.
And the National Party releases its tax plan for landlords.
I've met people and seen people who've actually fallen out of private rental markets, and as a result they go on the State House wait list.
In your home every morning. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Scattered showers, some heavy, possibly thundery near eastern coasts. Showers easing tonight, then clearing overnight, mainly fine tomorrow. Waikato and Bay of Plenty, scattered afternoon showers in Waikato, clearing tonight. Showers developing in Bay of Plenty tonight also, clearing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, mainly fine weather. For Gisborne, mainly fine but isolated morning and afternoon showers. Waitomo to Wellington, including central high country, also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mostly fine, but areas of cloud from Taranaki to Wellington, with isolated showers about the ranges, clearing tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly fine, with morning frosts tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers about Fiordland. Elsewhere, cloud increasing this afternoon with isolated showers developing, clearing from Bulla tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd light shower till tomorrow morning. Our next news headlines will be at around 5:20.
Nā mihi, Susana. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, ki checkpoint i tēnei rā. The National Party has unveiled its long-awaited tax relief plan, which could see some families $125 better off per week. National is promising to introduce 4 new taxes to cover the cost, including a levy on on foreign buyers who will once again be able to purchase homes here. The party would also scrap cheaper public transport and use money meant for lowering emissions to pay for the tax cuts. Our political reporter Katie Scotcher has the details.
National has long talked up its concern about what it calls the squeezed middle.
These are the New Zealanders who work hard for a living. Often they juggle multiple jobs and family responsibilities. And right now, under Labour, they are struggling to get ahead.
National's Nicola Willis today revealing her party's plan to help those people through its long-awaited tax policy. Its centrepiece, tax cuts delivered by raising income tax thresholds in line with inflation. National would also increase or expand tax credits like working for families.
To those people who are working extra hours, taking extra shifts to make it all add up, National sees your effort, we see your work. Relief is on its way.
Under National's plan, a family with children on an average income of $120,000 would get $250 a fortnight. A couple without children earning the same amount would receive $100. People on lower incomes would get less. Those earning $60,000 would keep $50 a fortnight, while a minimum wage worker would get an extra $20 every 2 weeks.
That is meaningful tax relief that will make a real difference to people's daily lives.
National is restating its commitment to remove the taxes introduced by Labour, including the Auckland regional fuel and app taxes. National leader Christopher Luxon also wants to fully restore interest deductibility for rental properties and bring back the Bright Line test to 2 years.
We expect downward pressure on rents because what we're saying very clearly is that those two initiatives that the government were advised not to do added $75 a week to rents.
Initial reaction from these Kiwis is mixed.
$50 more a week sounds okay.
Doesn't sound like it'll make much difference to me and my husband.
From what I've heard, it doesn't sound too beneficial for someone like me.
I don't think it will make any difference to me personally.
National's tax plan would cost $14.5 billion over 4 years. New taxes, including a levy on offshore operators of online gambling services, would help cover some of that cost. The most revenue would come from a 15% foreign buyer tax on the purchase of homes worth over $2 million. Nicola Willis is adamant it won't increase house prices.
These buyers won't be competing with ordinary New Zealanders, and also they will face a major barrier to speculation because they'll be paying 15% more than any New Zealander, which will deter speculation.
Labour is suspicious of the amount of revenue a foreign buyer tax would generate. The party has attacked the plan, saying the numbers don't add up as they rely on more foreign buyers coming into the market every year.
It's a voodoo plan, it's a fantasy plan, it doesn't add up. There are certainly some assumptions in there that would be very hard to stack up.
The Green Party is also critical of National's policy, specifically its plan to use emissions trading scheme revenue, which is currently used to lower emissions, to help pay for the tax cuts. Co-leader James Shaw made no attempt to hide his frustration.
It pisses me off, to tell you the truth. What they're doing is they're taking the money that is set aside for action on climate change and they're ploughing it into a general tax cut. That to me is, it incenses me because it's completely irresponsible.
National's plan would require deeper cuts to the public service on top of the almost $4 billion of cuts announced by the Labour government earlier this week. Labour's Andrew Little says this would affect frontline services.
Whether it's in MSD, whether it's in immigration, whether it's in health, whatever it is, it will mean that there'll be fewer services that people will interact with.
That is not true.
National is adamant frontline services would not be affected, as ministers would be specifically instructed to reduce back office spending.
And that was Katie Scotcher reporting. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, joins us now from our Parliament studio. Kia ora, Jane. So how does it all stack up so far?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, of course, as you've just heard there, Labour ministers busy tearing the plan apart. They're all looking in their different areas and seeing where they can pick holes in National's plan. And just before we came to air, Labour put out a media release questioning the amount of money, for example, that National could hope to raise from that foreign buyers tax. So there's still quite a lot of debate there in terms of the fiscals and how it all balances up, but certainly some pretty strong criticisms off the bat. But look, National says this is a good solid plan. It's been costed out, it's been put together really carefully. And in terms of those tax cuts or the extra income or the back pocket boosters they're calling it, it's made up of a collection of different things. So there are some income threshold changes, there's a use of another tax credit for people without children and sort of in the sort of 40 to 70 income bracket. And also they've included in there also the child care rebate that they announced a few months ago. So we're hearing, there's one figure being thrown around, an average family, a family earning about $120,000 as a household with a couple of kids, they could save up to $250 a fortnight, but you have to look at that in the component parts. So it's not just tax cuts, and that's why this package will be different for lots of different people depending on your independent circumstances.
OK, a couple of fish hooks. Let's talk about the public transport subsidies, scrapping them.
So this was an element of the plan that was not highlighted either in the presentation or in the document, but basically it would move to scrap all of those public transport subsidies, and that's free for some children up to a certain age and half price for other people, I think up to about age 24, but it also covers people on community service cards or the cards for disabled or low income New Zealanders, so they would all be gone. National says that the evidence just doesn't stack up in terms of the spending on the money, providing the incentives or giving bang for the buck is what it's intended. But if you look at, for example, a family with a few kids travelling to school and back, maybe not getting so much out of the Nationals plan, it could start to dilute the savings that it could have. So that came as a surprise, and that's prompted, as you'd expect, quite a lot of reaction. The other one is for low income families. So National has been very direct about wanting to target what it calls the squeezed middle. So, I suppose your sort of average household, people, going off to work, earning decent money, but still really struggling. But in this plan, because of the way that it's structured, those lower income families would get a bit of a tax cut, but that's really about it, and they could maybe get some more money through childcare. So that's another criticism, that there is quite a target on those more middle income families rather than the lowest earners.
But Jane, this is not the full picture, right? So this is the tax plan. It's not the full fiscal plan. What did they have to say about that?
That's right. So the original idea from National was that they would release their tax and their fiscal plan all together, which is really important because you need to be able to see how all the different policies stack up. And I'll give you one example. So today, Nicola Willis, the finance spokesperson, highlighted that National would take off the Auckland fuel tax, the regional fuel tax, and it would also not go ahead with petrol excise tax hikes that Labour has outlined. But what it announced in its transport package, but not today, is that actually that could be replaced with congestion charging. You could see toll roads and other taxes. So it's always going to come from somewhere. So you need to see that in the whole picture. But basically they decided to release their tax plan before the books are opened up on the 12th of September in what we call pre-FU, the pre-election fiscal update. And that is the most up-to-date showing of the books. And we're expecting the economy to get worse, for those signs to be dropping down, for tax revenue to be dropping. So there are all questions about whether National will be able to sustain its whole plan in those worsening economic conditions. It says it can. It says that it has done this plan so it's self-funded and, quote, won't be reliant on or won't be impacted by the mess that Labour might leave the books in. But that's going to be where the whole plan will be looked up, can be measured against the government's plan, and that won't happen, as I said, for another couple of weeks. So the tax plan has to be seen for what it is and the numbers, and there is a lot of detail and a lot of different elements to it, but it really won't be until that briefing that we can really look at National and Labour's plan side by side and make a proper judgment about it.
Thanks for the analysis, Jane. That is RNZ political editor Jane Patterson joining us live from the Parliament studio. 17 minutes after 5, Kia mau tunu mai. Do stay with us. Let us know your thoughts on this. At first blush, is it good for you or not, and why? Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Let us know if it's going to change your vote in any way, shape or form too. We're interested to hear. Christchurch police fear someone could be killed as children in virtual car theft rings compete to steal as many vehicles as possible, driving them erratically and posting their near-fatal antics on social media. One driver, as young as 8, was in a critical car crash. Their rides of choice, Aquas and Demios. In Christchurch, the number of car thefts on weekends is double what it used to be, and sometimes even more. Police say the kids hook up via social media, never meet, but form virtual groups working together to boost as many cars as possible. Superintendent Lane Todd fears the craze will lead to someone losing their life.
We've had a significant number of youths, and I'm talking sort of 12 to 14-year-old bracket, and they're actively involved in stealing cars, and then basically driving behaviour is extremely dangerous. Obviously, they don't have driver licences. They crash the vehicles and then they'll go and steal other cars. The car of choice they're using is a Toyota Aqua or a Mazda Demio, and they're generally working in small teams when they're doing this.
When you say there's been a big jump in the number of thefts, can you give us some kind of comparison?
So I've got some numbers here. So if we talk about in the last couple of years for Christchurch Metro, so that's the city, we've had 447 recorded proceedings against kids aged 10 to 17. And then also, if you include the wider bracket, that becomes 731. And if we look at that from a national point of view, that's about 7.5% over the last 2 years. So if I talk about the last sort of 6 months, we've had large numbers of cars being stolen, particularly in weekends. And whilst on average it might have been sort of 10 to 20, now we're sort of talking more 30 to 40. And in one weekend in particular, 3 weekends ago, 2 groups of youths were running a competition, and they actually stole 59 cars over 2 days.
When you say a competition,
that's the sort of numbers we're talking about.
Superintendent, when you say a competition, what do you mean exactly?
There was 2 groups of youths that basically, and they're using social media, had a competition to see which group could steal the most cars over a 48-hour period. And that's when we had that large number were stolen. So they were apprehended, but again, they're in that age bracket of sort of 12 to 14. So there's a lot of risk that is associated with that, as you'd imagine. Their driving behaviour is quite dangerous. They are actively ramming innocent vehicles, and in some cases ramming police vehicles. And they're also putting themselves at risk, but also the wider community. Not only that, the fact that they're stealing so many of these cars and just brazenly driving such poor and bad behaviour, putting them at risk is a significant concern for us.
What's your biggest fear here?
My personal biggest fear is that they're going to be involved in a fatal crash and an innocent party will be killed. We've had some close calls in relation to some serious crashes, but thankfully we've had no one killed yet. But that's my biggest fear. And the case we had late last week is, and this is during school time drop-off, so sort of between that 8:15 through to say 9:30, there was a small group of youths actively doing that near schools, and we had to put a helicopter up to apprehend those ones because the risks were just too high. So there's a few things we're doing to try and rectify this. One of them is we've increased our staffing in the youth targeting team, and they're predominantly focused on the high-end youth offenders. And then the second part of that is we're trialling a pilot that was trialled in Auckland, which is called Fast Track, and that's police and Oranga Tamariki working closely with partner agencies and really trying to put a lot of prevention opportunities in for the kids when they are apprehended. So not the high-end ones, but the ones that are coming through. So we've had that running for a few weeks now and already seen some good results on that, but we know it's worked really well in Auckland, so we're hoping that will replicate down here in Christchurch.
Where are these kids getting these ideas from?
A lot of it's social media, and they're actively sharing their offending on social media. And as I said before, they're actively working in teams using social media. The interesting thing with that also is they're actually not really, a lot of them aren't really meeting face-to-face. So they're just literally friending people via social media virtually, and they're working in groups virtually without even actually meeting people. The other concern we've got really too is that we've got kids that haven't engaged back with school post-COVID, and they're not actively engaged with positive activities. So whether it's sport or hobbies or other opportunities they could be doing. So that's the other part that we're really trying to work hard on, is getting these kids back to school, but also getting them actively involved in some positive environments.
What's your youngest kid so far being involved in one of these things?
So the youngest one I got called out for, which was a serious crash, and it wasn't a fatal, but it was close to being a fatal, and that kid was aged 8 and driving a Mazda Demio. That's extreme. I've never ever seen that in my career before. But certainly the majority of them sort of sit between that sort of 11, 12 up to 14-year bracket. That's the majority of them.
It is 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Let us know your thoughts on National's tax policy. Also, that interview with the Christchurch Superintendent there, Lane Todd. Kids as young as 8 stealing cars and competitive behaviour and posting videos of their near-fatal crashes. What can be done about that? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Anea Susana, mena pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. National says frontline services would not be affected under its long-awaited tax relief plan, which was unveiled today and is set to cost $14.5 billion over 4 years. The party's promising to pay for tax cuts and increased tax credits by raising income tax thresholds with inflation and scrapping public transport subsidies. National says a family with children on an average income of $120,000 would be $250 a fortnight better off. Christchurch police say children as young as 8 are behind a surge in car thefts, including nearly 60 vehicles stolen over one weekend earlier this month. Superintendent Lane Todd says children aged 11 to 12 are primarily behind the thefts, and he fears someone is going to get killed. 2 men have appeared in the Manukau District Court charged with organising fights between teens in the care of Auckland's Korowai Manaki Youth Detention Centre. The pair, aged 22 and 23, are charged with ill-treating a child. In St Petersburg, security has been tight for the private funeral of Wagner mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin. He was confirmed dead by Russian authorities after genetic analysis of 10 bodies found in wreckage of a crashed plane. And after 136 years, lessons are finally over at a rural North Island school which closed its doors today. Papatawa School on the Hawke's Bay side of the Manawatu Gorge began its final term with 16 children, but most lived 6 kilometres away in Woodville, and many parents couldn't afford to drive them to class each day. Those are the headlines. We'll have more headlines in around 20 to 6. Back to you, Lisa.
Ngā mihi eho. And returning to National's so-called back pocket boost. The party's unveiled a tax plan worth $14.6 billion over 4 years that it says is targeted at the squeezed middle. National says a family with children and on the average household income of $120,000 a year would be up to $250 a fortnight better off. It will shift tax brackets and fund the income relief by cutting government department costs, reprioritisation and a new 15% foreign buyers tax on properties over $2 million. Well, joining us now is National's finance spokesperson Nicola Willis. Kia ora, Nicola.
Kia ora, Lisa.
As you can imagine, some of the criticism is coming thick and fast, voodoo calculations and heroics with your numbers. To be clear, how confident are you in the accuracy of your calculations, please?
We're very confident. We've worked hard to make sure that the assumptions we've made in our modelling and our costings are very responsible. We've had those costings independently verified by Castalia, who've checked through them and who have concluded that it's based on reasonable assumptions that our costings are credible and consistent.
Okay, because it's an integrated package, right? Like a three-legged stool, one bit fails and you've got a problem. So let's look at the individual elements. Foreign buyers, you're hoping to get $740 million on average a year from this foreign buyers tax on homes over $2 million. How many houses would you have to sell a year in that bracket in order for you to realise that tax?
Fewer than 2,000. What we've done to come up with that figure is we've looked at foreign-based purchases of homes prior to the ban introduced to 2008. Then we've adjusted for what's happened with prices in the market, the distribution of the kinds of homes that foreign buyers were buying, which were at the luxury end of the market. We've then put in that $2 million floor and we've come up with an estimate, and we're very confident in that estimate.
Okay, because to the year ending June 2023, only 2,600 homes of that value sold. So you would be wanting 2/3 of those homes to go to foreign buyers in order to get your tax take.
We are confident that our costings add up and that we will be able to get the revenue that we have forecast from this tax.
Yeah, confidence doesn't deliver actual revenue though. So based on those figures, you would be anticipating 2/3 of those sales roundabout would have to go to foreign buyers. Where do you see that market coming from? Because Australia and Singapore are out of the mix, aren't they?
So there's a couple of things going on here. The first is when you look at the kinds of homes that foreign buyers tend to want to purchase, they are luxury homes at the upper end of the market. These aren't the everyday homes that you and I are living in or looking to buy. The second thing that's going on here is that at the moment people are completely banned. Once they can invest here, we are satisfied that when you look at what's happened at countries around the world, foreign purchasers will want to make those purchases even with a tax attached, because New Zealand is a desirable location. There are people who want to start businesses here, who want to bring their skills here, but at the moment are stopped from doing that because they can't buy a home here. So we're confident in our modelling and we think that it's the right thing to do to charge a tax on these purchases.
Okay, you mentioned the home you live in. Are you the squeezed middle? Because you're going to get $80 a fortnight at your place, aren't you?
This package is not about me. I am very pleased.
No, but that's what you get, though, isn't it? So are you the squeezed middle? That
is what I get. That is what I get. And can I tell you, I get less from this package than a median income earner or an average income household, because an average income household would get $100 a fortnight out of this package. A median income earner earning $60,000 a year would get $50 a fortnight out of this package if they don't have children, whereas I'd only get $40. And I think that's right, because we wanted to target this tax relief so that the squeezed middle got the most, and we have achieved that.
But Nicola, if you want it to be really targeted, you don't need, arguably, that $80 a fortnight, because you are not the squeezed middle, right? So why didn't you target it even more so? You could have, for example, put in a higher tax rate above to claw back that money you were giving to people who aren't squeezed.
We did target it. We've targeted it very heavily so that an average income household with children, and I think those are the people who are really struggling right now with food prices, with higher rents, with bigger mortgage payments, they get up to $250 more per fortnight. That's where the support needs to go. These are the people that are often missing out on other entitlements, on other support, and we've honed in on them. You know, the other side of this is that it's not actually about me, but there are people who are earning, let's say, $78,000 who have huge family responsibilities, are juggling multiple jobs, have massive mortgage payments to make. And do they deserve $40 a fortnight to help them with the extra cost of living? I think they do.
What about rentals? You mentioned that, right? Talked about rent. You're reinstating tax breaks for rental property owners. So how much do you expect rent to drop as a consequence of that?
Well, what we know is that at the moment, the costs on landlords are being ramped up significantly by Labor. By removing that interest deductibility, they're effectively adding another tax, and landlords I have spoken to have said, look, I am trying not to pass it on to my tenants, But by next year, when it cranks up further, it's going to be too hard. I'm going to have to pass on some of that cost to tenants. So by stopping that cranking up that Labor has planned, we're confident that we'll take some of the pressure out and we will take some of that upward momentum out of rental prices.
Okay, so you have estimated, you say $75 a week on average is the rent rise, right? So is rent going to go down $75 a week as a consequence of you reinstating those tax breaks?
So what that $75 is that's how much average rents have increased per week since Labor introduced their landlord taxes. Now, what you're asking me to estimate is how much more will they rise under Labor. That's not a causal link, is it,
Nicola? Nicola, that's not a causal link. You can't prove that $75 average increase is a result of that tax. In fact, a report earlier this year said market rents are guided by demand. That's the single biggest thing, and also wage inflation.
Well, what we know is that the government's own advisors, when the government asked for advice on what would happen if they added this tax and the bright line tax, which is a capital gains tax by stealth, they asked their advisors what will happen, and their advisors warned of a couple of impacts. One, they said this will add pressure to rents. Two, they said this will lead to a lot of churn in the private rental market. And be careful, because you're going to end up with more people on the State House waiting list and more people needing emergency accommodation. What we have right now, Lisa, is a State House waiting list that is more than quadrupled what it was when Labor came to office. And last night, hundreds of New Zealand children were put to bed in a motel room. We need a functional private rental market, and that requires landlords being able to provide affordable housing.
You announced today that the so-called ute tax, as it's colloquially known, will go, right? So that helps pay for the incentives for EVs. So what's happening with the incentive payments for EVs? Are they gone as well?
We're going to make an announcement on the campaign trail very soon about our policy in that area. Today we've underscored our commitment that the ute tax will go.
Right, but you're saying basically this is a redistribution, reprioritisation package, not additional spending, so non-inflationary. So can you be upfront then about what's happening? Because are you funding that EV subsidy from somewhere else, or it's a gone burger?
Look, we're going to be very clear. We've fully costed that into our transport plan, and we will announce that policy, and you'll be able to examine the detail. The tax package that we've announced today is fully self-funding. It's responsible in the sense that the tax reduction that we're delivering is funded both through reprioritisations of existing spending and then extra revenue measures. So we think this is the right way to do it.
Should a Tesla buyer get $7,000 subsidy from taxpayers?
No, they should not.
So then it's going, is it?
Well, we've long said that we do not think that is the way to achieve emission reduction in the economy, to subsidise high-value electric cars in that way. Of course, we want to see more people driving electric cars, but that's not the way to target support.
Appreciate your time, Nicola. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Nicola Willis, who is National's finance spokesperson there. Incoming New Zealand Cricket Chief Executive Scott Wenning describes himself as a Test cricket romantic who will focus on the longer format of the game. The businessman and former Wellington first-class cricketer replaces David White, who stepped down from the role after 12 years in the job. We're joined now by our sports reporter Felicity Reid. What does the change at the top of New Zealand cricket mean?
Well, Scott Wenning says that there will be a degree of nervousness around the cricket fraternity after it's been such a long time since there has been a change in CEO. But he's coming in and he's saying that there won't be any drastic or immediate changes. He's quite a fan of the strategic plan of New Zealand cricket, and he said that was one of the reasons why he had actually applied for this job. One of the reasons New Zealand Cricket will have wanted him, though, is his relationship building. He's a former chairman of the New Zealand Cricket Players Association, so he understands that dynamic between the players and New Zealand cricket and what that means between, as we sort of battle around some of these things around contracts as well moving forward. He's also been a lawyer with governance experience in the financial services sectors and telecoms overseas, so that's included in places like Asia, the UK and the Middle East. All places which are actually quite important to the global cricket negotiations and New Zealand cricket's role in what they want to do going forward as well. And in terms of having the finger on the pulse of what New Zealand's top players want, Winnick understands that the Black Caps players and the fans want more Test cricket on the calendar.
I see Test cricket as being key to keeping players playing for New Zealand. I think if we didn't have Test cricket, it'd be much harder to keep them interested. Absolutely, I'll be looking to try and promote Test cricket while balancing the fact that we do need to play the higher revenue earning parts of the game as well.
Community cricket is also high on his agenda. He was saying today when he was quizzed about what he would like to sort of leave the game once he, I guess, moves on from this role. He wants to be known for the investment that he's put into community cricket and putting it into the right parts of the grassroots game. OK, let's talk tennis. What's going on at the US Open? It's a bit of a different one. It's some of the things that are happening off the court which are actually concerning the players this week in New York. So tennis is generally a bit of a quiet game. There's some etiquette that the fans follow, and the chair umpire at most tennis tournaments brings the crowd into line with a quiet please. This isn't something that happens in New York, and so the crowd have been getting a little unruly. One player who is in particularly upset with what's been going on is Laura Siegmund. She was up against Coco Gauff, who's obviously the home favourite there in that first round. And so Coco was leading the game. It was in the final set, and Laura Siegmund was being quite slow to face up to the serve. This got the crowd to boo. It also got Coco to complain to the chair umpire. So Laura Siegmund actually got some penalty for this as well. But that led to the crowd cheering, which also after the game meant in the press conference, Laura Siegmund cried. She was unhappy with the way that the crowd had treated her. There are players that probably act a little bit differently on court, throw the racket, scream at the crowd, but this wasn't something she'd been done. So she was quite unhappy with the way everything had played out. And also there's the smell on the outer courts, which has also caught people off guard.
What? What kind of smell, Felicity?
It's the marijuana that... Maria Zachary, she was playing her first round match on an outer court, and she had said to the chair umpire during the game and afterwards that she could smell this coming from... The stadium is next to a park, so she was suggesting that it was coming from there. USA Tennis has also wanted to do an investigation to just figure out where this is all coming from. They've said that it's not coming from the stands, but they actually can't tell the players where it is coming from.
Interesting. Well, we'll keep an eye on that one. Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid, sports reporter there. Let's get to some of your feedback. Some of you getting in touch about the National Party's tax policy introduced today. This person says an extra $20 every 2 weeks. Wow, that's 3 hands of bananas. Is it? Bananas are quite expensive. Liz says minimum wages get $10 a week. How does that make a meaningful difference to my life as someone at the squashed bottom? Also, could you ask Nicola to talk about this without saying squeezed middle? Yeah, it's an awkward phrase, isn't it? I've heard that too many times today, says Liz. And someone else says, I can't believe that National is going to scrap the 20 hours of free ECE. That's awful. And just a note on that, that's just for the extension for 2-year-olds, still there for 3 and 4-year-olds, if you're wondering about that policy. Do keep the feedback coming, 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It's almost 20 to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Time for the business news now. Ko taku hua e Nainei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. OK, KiwiSaver, Nona. Investments on what is called harmful companies continues to build. What are harmful companies by definition?
Yeah, so Mindful Money comes up with this report every year and so forth, and it says that we've hit a record $8.6 billion invested in companies like those that, you know, do oil and gas, perhaps tobacco, that kind of thing. That's what we consider to be a harmful company by Mindful Money's
definition.
Okay, so over $8 billion. That's a lot of money. And what Mindful Money is saying is that really for the ethical investment, those are in companies that they would deem to be ethical. Well, I don't know. That must be a long list, right? Because if the other one is just oil and gas and so forth, I mean, there's probably a lot of companies. Gambling would be one that they would see as harmful. They're saying that it's going to take investors, that's the consumers who invest in KiwiSaver, to vote with their feet and insist that the funds that they're invested in are not invested in these kinds of companies. So it's an education process.
You'd have to keep a close eye on it.
I think it's pretty tough. You'd have to really be an active take an active interest in what your funds are invested in. And one of the problems is that people just generally aren't. And that's something that is acknowledged by the Mindful Money report.
Okay, interesting. Residential building consents continue to fall. What is the latest?
Okay, so new homes consented last month down 25% on the year earlier. So that is significant. Just over 3,050 new homes were consented last month. Okay, now standalone homes were down 23%. And retirement villages, well, they were up 14%. And apartments up 5.4%. Now, interestingly, in the National Party's tax plan, they talk about depreciation. They're talking about taking that off. Well, the Property Council were very quick.
Commercial buildings, yeah.
Yes, very quick to point out that one of the things that the National Party said was that they were committed to bringing in depreciation for build-to-rent. Build-to-rent properties. Well, they would... That's not been mentioned in their policy whatsoever. They've just said they're going to take that off. That's in line with what Labour has said. And now that's been raised as an issue because that's an inconsistency. I mean, if you're going to encourage that type of investment, those kinds of commercial buildings, which are for the long term, would probably expect to have depreciation. I mean, rental properties do tend to depreciate because of the wear and tear and so on. So, interesting times. Well, a lot of inconsistencies going on with tax policy, that's for sure.
And markets, what numbers do you bring for us, Nona?
Okay, so the top 50 index, it fell just 7 points today. Hardly anything, really. 11,521. The dollar had an interesting roller coaster ride overnight. It went way up following some data which suggested that the U.S. economy wasn't as strong as people were thinking. So we went to, I guess, almost, 59.9, like that. But we ended up at 59.5 U.S. cents, still above where we were yesterday. 91.9 Australian, 47.2 British pence. There you go.
Still in the doldrums. Okay, thank you, Nona.
Not better than yesterday.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News. It is 17 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, do keep your feedback coming on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Get in touch, whether it's about the National Party's tax policy unveiled today, what it means for you, whether you like it or not and why. Problems with young children, and they are children, stealing cars in Christchurch. Do get in touch, 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
Thanks, Lisa. Labour says National's tax plan does not add up with enormous cuts to public services and no action on climate change. National says its $14 billion four-year proposal would adjust income tax brackets and increase or expand some tax credits paid for through public sector spending cuts, immigration levies and a tax on foreign property buyers. National's finance spokesperson Nicola Willis told Checkpoint she was confident in the figures. 3 youths have been referred to youth aid after 2 assaults on young girls in Rotorua in the last week. Mayor Tanya Tapsil is calling for urgent police reinforcements, saying crime is forcing the council to spend $2 million a year on private security. Police say they have an increased presence in Rotorua's centre. The mayor of Kyiv says 2 people died and another was wounded in Russia's latest air attack on the Ukrainian capital. Vitaly Klitschko says several buildings were set on fire by falling debris from targets destroyed by air defences. Meanwhile, Russia says a wave of Ukrainian drones targeted several regions, but most were shot down. Hawaii's Governor Josh Green is promising to rebuild homes for the more than 6,000 people who lost theirs in the wildfires on the island of Maui. Governor Green says the homeless are in hotels and Airbnbs. And the Southwest Papua provincial government in Indonesia wants people to eat more fish. It's launched a campaign to promote fish consumption among school students to help overcome stunted growth. That's the news. We'll have another bulletin and weather at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho. Some Aucklanders are putting their houses on stilts to avoid floodwaters. Research commissioned by NIWA says it's a cost-effective solution, but it won't work for everyone. Felix Walton has more.
Andy's house is on a floodplain in Sandringham near central Auckland. When it flooded in January, he decided something had to change, but instead of moving out, he's moving up by about 800 millimetres.
The water came through about 6 inches deep. It's not like it was up to the windows or anything like that, but it's just enough to ruin all your furniture, ruin all your carpets, because everything's made of MDF these days. Since then, we haven't been able to get it repaired anyway, so we thought we might as well lift it.
Andy says the floors of his 100-year-old villa were already too low, so it was an easy decision to make.
The floor level was below the minimum current standard of 500 above the 100-year flood level. And when we bought it, I said, it's a 100-year flood, they only happen every now and then. And then we got the January event.
As sea levels rise and extreme storms become more common, NIWA is researching ways to mitigate flood risks. Manager of Coastal Climate Risk and Infrastructure, Conan Andrews, says lifting a house by up to 2 metres is a great option, but only under certain circumstances.
Houses located in environments that are either frequently flooded or potentially affected by very extreme events, like a 1-in-100-year event. Raising houses in those situations, this is a very viable alternative.
He says raising a timber house is relatively straightforward, but buildings made of brick or concrete are another story.
Raising a normal timber-framed, piled house is feasible and cost-effective against the cost of building a new build. However, when you consider concrete construction, that cost starts becoming a bit less financially viable.
Location is another factor. Mr. Andrews says a raised house can only do so much if the rest of the street is underwater.
This piece of research is focused on the house itself. It didn't consider all the ancillary infrastructure around it. Yes, if you could raise a house, your house will be protected, but everything else around it would be inundated.
West Aucklanders Flooding Chair Lyle Carter wants the council to shoulder some of the responsibility.
A lot of the reason why the flooding happened in the first place was because of the lack of maintenance. I think there's a moral obligation on the council, who did very little to maintain the streams. Then surely the moral obligation is on the council to pay for these raising of homes.
Andy agrees.
It would be really good if we could actually get some money from local government or something like that to contribute to us making our house basically a more livable and not at risk anymore from flooding, because it's taken a fair chunk out of our renovation budget.
He says the council should step up and help people upgrade their homes so future floods aren't as destructive.
It is 11 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Well, things have hit a bum note with Queenstown's famous singing Sheepdog. Happy and his owner have been busking together in the resort for more than 2.5 decades. But an alleged gnarl-up has led the council to classify Happy as a menacing dog, meaning he has to wear a muzzle at all times in public places. Owner Kim Turton says it was a fleeting scuffle that happened when another small dog was allowed to creep up on Happy from behind, startling him. And Kim joins us now. Hi, Kim. Was anyone hurt in this scuffle?
No, all three of us, that's me and the two other people that were about to play their instruments after I was packed up. All three of us asked and we couldn't see, and we asked them twice, they didn't reply, and all three of us noticed it wasn't hurt, there was no blood, and pretty much they just walked off with it.
So whose fault do you reckon it was? Did Happy do anything wrong?
I would like to apologise to everybody in Queenstown, but it was my fault because I can't watch him 100% every single second, and I wish I could. But a woman came from the blind side and she must have been crazy just to let her dog come up, sniff him, startle my dog, and let her dog underneath mine. I grabbed my dog as quick as possible, and now we've been framed. It's just heartbreaking.
So, describe Happy's nature to us normally. What's he like as a dog? Is he menacing? Because that's his classification now.
Can he what? Never sing.
No, is he menacing? Because that's his classification now. So I'm wondering...
Some people in Queenstown would say he's menacing because now and then a dog comes too close. He gives it a bit of a growl, but he's on my foot. He's on the lead on my foot. He can't go anywhere more than about a metre past where I'm sitting. In other words, I've got total control of him when I'm busking. But most of the locals in Queenstown just take a berth because I do have orange beacons around me. And it's been 7 years with no incident. He had one when he was 9 months old and a reckless puppy, and I was still training him. But that was it. There's been heaps of other little instances like that when people get frightened or they think their dog and I admit that. And I apologise to the whole of Queenstown if their dog has ever been frightened, but what this council officer has done, and I don't blame the council because I think most of them are unaware of what one person has done. Just overstepped her mark and just been... she hasn't followed any protocols and she's broken the law.
Do you think it's heavy-handed, Kim, what's happened with Happy?
I thought about it for 1 month. I had the mask on him for 1 month. I know he hates it. I know I hate it. I know I've had a sadness ever since. And I know a lot of people think I'm mean for forcing him to sing with it. But the bottom line is, there's somebody working there who just broke the law. Is she still working there? I should say, are they still working there?
Okay, so put that to your side for a minute, Kim. Just tell me about Happy and what he thinks of the muzzle and having to wear the muzzle.
So many times he looks so cute because after the song he lays down and rubs his head against the side of the guitar case where he lays, but he's actually itching his face because he hates the muzzle. So it's good and bad.
Hey,
and he still sings really well with the muzzle.
Okay, so he can still sing. I sense he's there with you. Is that Happy I can hear with you there?
Yeah, he's here.
Hey, have you got your guitar handy? Could we have a bit of a tune? That would be lovely. We'd love to hear from him.
Once again, I want to stress, it seems the only way I can go now is the next port of call will be somebody like the mayor or the ombudsman, but I can't let this this shameful atrocity go ahead because we didn't do anything wrong.
So you want to try and reverse the decision? Yep, that's what your plan is, to try and get the decision reversed, Kim. So
I gave the council so many opportunities to talk to me, and I just pleaded and begged with all of them that I spoke to, but they just handed me on to someone else. And I begged and pleaded that I don't want to go down this avenue. But it's been 8 weeks and I haven't even received my own report that I'm entitled to. Okay. 8 weeks.
I understand this is really obviously distressing you. Are you up to having a bit of a sing with Happy? Would he want to give us a tune?
I agree with you. I've been way too emotional about it. It's been going on in my head every day for more than 100 days.
Can understand. Animals that have a way of burrowing into your heart, Kim.
Yes, exactly. And on behalf of all the dog lovers out there, I would like to say, there goes my hero. He's ordinary. There goes my hero. He's awesome.
He is an enthusiastic participant, Kim. I wish you all the best. Thank you to you and Happy for being on the program. We appreciate your time. That was Happy, the singing dog, who is known for busking around Queenstown with his owner, Kim Turton there. Now, we do have a statement from Queenstown Lakes District Council that says that because the case is under appeal with a hearing scheduled for next month, it isn't appropriate for the council to comment at this stage. It says the council will continue to respond directly to the individuals concerned. Australians lost a record $3 billion to scammers last year, and older people are among those targeted most. A group of older Adelaide residents is fighting back, educating themselves about dodgy links and emails that are just too good to be true. The ABC's Bethany Alderson has more.
Retiree Larry Pianilla was this close to falling victim to a scammer.
They called me and then said, you have a refund of $280-something. I nearly opened my laptop and then it looked like different. It's not familiar to me, so I closed my laptop straight away.
Older Australians are frequently targeted by scammers, especially around tax time. And there's a long list of ways scammers try to steal victims' money. Carolyn Piper is a financial counsellor at Anglicare SA.
It's often our most vulnerable people in our vulnerable communities. Lots of the, hey mum, I need some money, particularly relationship scams, not so much the investment scams, but lots of, the smaller scams catching them out.
At least $3.1 billion was lost to scammers last year. It's an enormous jump compared to the $2 billion lost the year before. Carolyn Piper says it's still unclear just how many people fall for scams. Many are too embarrassed to report it.
It's huge impact. There's a lot of shame associated with owning that you've fallen to a scam, so there's a lot of shame that people are feeling, which often means they're not coming forward for support.
A new grassroots program is offering interactive training sessions to help older people better protect themselves. Some of those attending the first information session at a football club in Adelaide are confident they can pick out a scammer. For them, it's about keeping up.
Not being in the workforce anymore, even though I was really computer literate when I was working, we really haven't increased our skills, and we know you really need to know, the latest stuff.
Other attendees are using the information to fight back against the scammers, or at least waste their time.
She said, right, well, now can you go onto this website? I said, how do I do that? And she said, well, you use Chrome. I said, yeah, but I haven't got internet on my computer. Oh, well, how do you normally send your emails? And I said, I go to the library. And she says, oh, yeah, have you got the number for the library, and let me know when you'll be there and I'll ring you. And I tied her up for half an hour. I just love doing these things.
It's hoped the initiative will be rolled out nationally.
Alrighty, let's get to some of your feedback before the news at 6 on the National Party's tax plan unveiled today. Gary says no to tax cuts as you cut the funding to essential services such as health. Interesting, Gary, because they say absolutely not cutting frontline services to health. They've identified a bunch of government departments that they do expect to make savings, but they're giving assurances no frontline services will be cut from the likes of health, education, policing, defence and a whole other list. This person says it's interesting that no one seems to have brought up National's plan to change the Bright Line test from 10 years down to 2 years. So rental speculation is firmly back on the agenda, this listener says. Also interesting, comparing Wood's few thousand shares in Auckland airports, but no mention of Christopher Luxon's holdings of rental properties, no doubt worth millions. Louise has got in touch to say if there is no staff to do backroom work, then this work must be done by frontline workers. This is exactly what National did last time they were in power, to the detriment of frontline workers. And the callousness of cutting the transport subsidies to vulnerable people is just cruel. A number of you raising the issue of that. Someone else says, bit rich for Labor and Greens to criticise National's tax plans when they have wasted billions of dollars over 6 years with no significant gain for the average Kiwi.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Lei Atawa tēnei. National says fewer than 2,000 luxury homes would have to be sold to foreign buyers a year to raise the millions needed to help pay for tax cuts. Under its plan, a 15% foreign buyer tax would be levied on houses worth over $2 million, raising $750 million a year. In the 12 months ending June, just over 2,500 houses worth that much were sold here. Finance spokesperson Nicola Willis told Checkpoint once the ban on foreign buyers is lifted, that figure will grow.
When you look at what's happened at countries around the world, foreign purchasers will want to make those purchases even with a tax attached because, New Zealand is a desirable location. There are people who want to start businesses here, who want to bring their skills here, but at the moment are stopped from doing that because they can't buy a home here.
Labour is calling the costings voodoo. Christchurch police fear an innocent person will be killed by children committing car thefts. The thefts, which are mostly done by 11 to 14-year-olds, involve groups competing online to steal as many vehicles as possible and posting their crimes on social media. Superintendent Lane Todd told Checkpoint their behaviour is dangerous and putting people at risk.
Their driving behaviour is quite dangerous. They are actively ramming innocent vehicles and in some cases ramming police vehicles. And they're also putting themselves at risk, but also the wider community.
Lane Todd says nearly 60 cars were stolen over one recent weekend as two groups competed to steal the most. The Immigration Minister says migrants with visas tied to a handful of employers being investigated have had their visas cancelled. Up to half a dozen accredited employers are being investigated over mistreatment of 115 Indian and Bangladeshi workers. The Minister confirmed today that the 10 migrants stopped at the border and the nearly 200 who've been told not to travel to New Zealand have had their visas cancelled.
The sponsor was under investigation. In fact, one of them, at least, of the 5 or 6 companies had liquidated. Their visas related to one of those companies, but it's self-evidently the work wasn't there, and so we had to turn them around.
However, Immigration New Zealand says the nearly 200 affected migrants overseas are under border alerts to ensure they don't board a flight to New Zealand, but their visas haven't been cancelled. Wellington Free Ambulance says mental illness in the community is reaching almost pandemic-like proportions. People calling 111 in mental distress will soon be met by a joint response involving police, mental health professionals, ambulance officers and, in some cases, iwi. Wellington Free Ambulance Chief Executive Dave Robinson says their service has been involved in the scheme pilot and its benefits have been shown.
Our primary area of expertise is in health. Other times, safety is a requirement both for the attendees but also for the patients as well, and that's where we really leverage off the skills of our colleagues in police and off the very specialist expertise of those mental health workers that we stand alongside.
The scheme's currently operating pilots in 6 districts and will expand nationwide over the next 5 years. Australia will hold a constitutional referendum on October the 14th on whether to recognise its Indigenous people for the first time. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has urged Australians to vote yes.
On that day, every Australian will have a once-in-a-generation chance to bring our country together and to change it for the better.
The question asked will be whether an Indigenous voice to Parliament, which would act as an independent advisory body, should be enshrined in the country's constitution. The Mayor of Dunedin says he's disappointed a community board leader used a racist slur against a member of the public in a pub. A code of conduct complaint has been made against Strath-Taieri Community Board Chair Barry Williams, prompting an independent investigation that found he had breached it. Mayor Jules Radich says he sent a letter of censure after a vote by the Dunedin City Council yesterday.
You know, the thing that happened here, of course, it happened in a pub. And he didn't even remember that it had happened. So, you know, it was just a relatively minor thing. And certainly the people who overheard the incident didn't report it or bring it to anyone's attention.
Jules Radich says the complaint was lodged after word of the incident spread in the small community. Evacuation orders are in force across more than 20 counties in Florida as the US state awaits the arrival of Hurricane Idalia. It's now expected to develop into a Category 4 hurricane, the BBC's John Sudworth reports.
Fuelled by the warm waters out in the Gulf of Mexico, Idalia has, as predicted, been strengthening overnight. The forecast track has been adjusted slightly, now taking the hurricane directly towards the Big Bend, a relatively less populated area of the Florida coast. But a far wider stretch of coastline is likely to be hit by the serious storm surge that it's expected to bring with it. And the authorities have been repeating warnings to anyone in the path still holding out in their homes to get out while they can.
Army officers have appeared on national television in the Western African country of Gabon to claim they have taken power. They say they are annulling the results of Saturday's election in which President Ali Bongo was declared the winner only an hour before. The Electoral Commission says Mr Bongo won just under 2/3 of the vote in an election the opposition claimed was fraudulent. If a coup is confirmed, it follows one in Niger a few weeks ago. That's the news.
Tomorrow after 1pm on Afternoons with Jessie Mulligan, Mary Holmes says house prices may have risen very fast over the last few years, but she encourages home buyers to look at how much they need. New Zealand homes are more than twice the size of those in UK, Europe and Japan, so how big does your house need to be? Plus, in sporting history, Precious McKenzie shares memories of his beautiful career. That's on Afternoons from 1pm tomorrow here on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Scattered showers, some heavy, possibly thundery near eastern coasts. Showers easing tonight, then clearing overnight, mainly fine tomorrow. Waikato and Bay of Plenty. Scattered showers clearing in Waikato tonight, and Bay of Plenty showers developing tonight, clearing tomorrow morning. Gisborne mainly fine with isolated showers tomorrow morning and afternoon. Waitomo to Wellington. Central High Country, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly fine with areas of cloud from Taranaki to Wellington and isolated showers about the ranges, clearing tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly fine weather with morning frosts tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers about Fiordland with cloud increasing, elsewhere with isolated showers clearing from Bulla tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd light shower. Our next news headlines are at 6:30. Thanks, Lisa.
Nā mihi, Susanna. No mai, hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. People calling 111 in mental distress will soon be met by a joint response involving police, mental health professionals, ambulance officers and in some cases, iwi. The Police Minister has announced a 5-year plan to introduce a new co-response model across the Motu. Bill Hickman reports.
The scheme has already been piloted in 6 districts ahead of being adopted nationally. Police Minister Ginny Anderson says nearly 10% of 111 calls are mental health related. She says the move will ease demand on frontline police and better support people experiencing mental health crises.
When families are in times of need of mental health support, a mental health worker is the best person to be delivering that service. Not only does that provide people in mental health distress with that support they need, but also it frees up our frontline.
Mental Health Foundation Chief Executive Sean Robinson says when people call 111 in vulnerable states, their immediate safety and long-term recovery are at stake. He says getting things wrong at the initial point of contact can make a difficult situation worse for patients, emergency staff and healthcare workers alike.
If someone arrives at a mental health service or at an A&E and what's just happened to them is that they've been put in a police car, brought in by police, which can be a very frightening thing, they're likely to be even more agitated, even more untrusting of what's going on for them.
Robinson says the high prevalence of Māori in mental health statistics makes iwi inclusion in the response teams a crucial element in ensuring positive outcomes.
The more someone looks like me and can talk to me in my own kind of experience and language, the better. And so it's absolutely vital that iwi and Māori are really front and centre in developing this co-response model.
Wellington Police District Mental Health Lead Jim Dunlop says trials of the scheme had been an overwhelming success.
It's being able to give somebody the right care at the right time. The feedback from the people that we've been to see in their times of distress has shown that it is far less traumatic and it is a greater sense of safety for those people involved. So that's essentially what we want.
Wellington Free Ambulance Chief Executive Dave Robinson says the rise of mental illness in the community is reaching almost pandemic-like proportions. He says the service's involvement in the pilot scheme over the last 3 years in Wellington had shown the benefit of a collaborative response to mental health call-outs.
Our primary area of expertise is in health. Other times, safety is a requirement both for the attendees but also for the patients as well, and that's where we really leverage off the skills of our colleagues in police and off the very specialist expertise of those mental health workers that we stand alongside.
Ginny Anderson says cost estimates of the national implementation of the co-response model were yet to be determined.
After well over a century, a rural school is closing its doors today, a victim, its principal says, of the cost of living. Papatawa School near the Manawatu Gorge had just 2 pupils return this year, so a decision was made to shut. Jimmy Allingham reports.
It's only about 6 kilometres from Woodville, near the entrance to the gorge, but the school, with its sweeping views of the Ruahine and Tararua ranges and chorus of farm animals, feels more remote. Principal Juanita Katane shows me around.
The shed there that was filled with PE gear, that new shed came since I've been there. The forest that we can see on our left here, I know about 8-10 trees, that was the enchanted forest, a very good, the kids loved playing in there. Sand pit, and I'm pretty sure that this part here, from there to the end there, is the original where the school was.
Yeah, it looks like one of those old school buildings, doesn't it? An old building once home to a throng of primary school children, but now empty after the final pupils left earlier this year.
So we do have a swimming pool down there, which is operational. It's quite a big space.
Yeah, and across the road there, that's the rugby.
Yep, it's a field. Wasn't the most popular place because the stock grazing there, so there was quite a bit of poop, and the children weren't that keen on running through there. Townies.
The school opened in 1887, but today it's all over. And to mark the occasion, it's expected about 120 former pupils and staff will be there to reminisce.
So these are some of the things from the 1960s and that we thought people might want to have a look at, like old education notes, like points tables for athletics in the 70s. So those things will be out for people to have a look at. There's a whole heap of old photos in this box I've found.
Memories of a heyday that's gradually whittled away.
At the end of last year, we realised that our roll this year wasn't going to be very high. So we sort of had been talking about it as a board as to see what would happen day one, term one of this year. And unfortunately, we only had 2 children turn up, which was actually 1 more than I expected. So that was kind of nice. There was no one coming through.
Mrs. Katane says last year's final term began with 16 children across 2 classrooms, but other pressures were growing.
All of our children would drive out from Woodville, and that didn't become an option for a lot of our families with, the cost of living and the stuff that's sort of been happening in society at the moment. They needed to be at the school that was closer to them.
Mrs. Katane arrived at the school in 2017 when it had about 25 pupils.
Some years we went right down. Then some years we came back, because we thought, that's it, we're going to be surplus staffed. And then we'd have 2 or 3 families of 4 or 5 turn up, so that would put our numbers back up. So we just really went up and down, and this was probably the biggest down that we'd had last year.
One man who knows the school well is former pupil and board chairman Elroy Sowry, who works just down the road. He isn't happy to see it close and can't understand why his successors on the board let it happen.
I do remember it, being a really good school, and it's always been a school for kids that just really haven't fitted in, the square pegs that don't fit into the round hole, and they've always seemed to have come here from out of town and just, always been really well looked after.
His great-grandmother went to Papatawa, and his children too, with younger daughter Eve having to find a new school this year.
She was the last child here, along with another family that left just before us, and the man from the ministry rang me and told me to send my kids somewhere else so they could close up. It didn't really sink in at the time, but at the end of that, the next day my wife and I picked up our daughter and we left. That was it.
This is it too for Juanita Katane, who's had a busy few weeks winding down the school. Soon she'll be gone to settle at her new home in South Taranaki, where she'll consider her future. She says she'll miss her colleagues, the children, and the views from the school.
To be honest, I don't know how I'm feeling at the moment. It's just a bit, it's not bleh, but it's just it's sad and it's anxious and it's all those sorts of things.
The Ministry of Education says a change manager will be appointed to oversee the closure, including what will happen to the school's assets. If the property isn't needed for education purposes, it will be disposed of according to the Public Works Act.
And that was Jimmy Allingham. It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A few of you getting in touch with our interview with Kim Turton. Dog dad to happy. They're quite famous in Queenstown for busking together. The dog, a sheepdog, sings along with him. He's in a bit of strife at the moment with the council, classified as menacing dog. Another hearing to follow, and Kim is challenging that. Says his dog was approached by another dog and startled. And the feedback is pretty consistent. This person says, free happy, not his fault. He was startled by a dog that should have been keeping its distance. Another says that poor man and his dog happy. Owners should not let their dog just go up to other dogs. It is poor training on their part. This one, and this is the way dogs are. If a dog goes to another dog, it is unpredictable. I loved Happy and his owner when I was in Queenstown. His singing, good luck, says Claire from Otatahi. And someone else has got in touch to say, you've finally gone to the dogs. I think this is a lesson in protocol around dogs. What is the right protocol? If one or both dogs are on the leash, do you approach without asking first? Do you give a heads up? What's the deal? 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. To the United States now, where authorities are warning Hurricane Idalia has the makings of an unprecedented event for the Big Bend area of Florida. The storm is fast approaching and gaining strength. CNN's Gloria Pasmino is in Clearwater Beach, and a short time ago she told me the Sunshine State is bracing for a possible Category 4 impact.
We have been in Clearwater Beach for the past several hours, and conditions have significantly worsened. The wind is picking up and the rain has been falling steadily. It comes in and out, and what we are seeing is those outer bands of this hurricane, Hurricane Idalia, now expected to make a landfall potentially as a Category 4 hurricane. That means this is a very dangerous storm. The area where we are right now is on the western coast of Florida, and a lot of the counties here have been told that there is a mandatory evacuation order. For the most part, we have been told that residents have been heeding the warnings here, but I have spoken to local residents who told me they are riding out the storm because they live inland, and they are hopeful that they'll be able to ride out the storm safely. So the next hours are going to be critical here as conditions likely continue to worsen as the storm approaches. One thing to keep in mind is this hurricane is traveling across the Gulf of Mexico, and the Gulf of Mexico has very warm waters right now, record-breaking ocean temperatures. And what that means is the warm water is fuel. It's like jet fuel for this hurricane. It picks up that warm water and it creates strength in the storm. So that means this hurricane, as I said, very dangerous, very serious, and people who are here in the area need to heed the warnings that they have been getting from local officials.
So, Gloria, the people who are evacuating, where are they going?
So a lot of the counties here where we are in Florida have opened up shelters where people can go. Usually shelters, they are in places where it's safe to ride out a hurricane, places where there will not be a loss of power. The governor here has said he expects a lot of the residents here in Florida to experience a loss of power, and that is going to be a big problem for people who may be power dependent, especially those people who may be elderly or who may have a health condition that requires them to have access to electricity. So for those people, shelters have opened up, usually in places like schools and community centers that are equipped to handle this kind of condition. That is where most people have evacuated to. Another option that people have for those who do not want to go to a shelter is that they can drive inland. Officials have said it is not necessary to leave the state. You just have to get away from the storm. So if you have family or friends who live inland, who live on higher ground, that is also a place where people have gone. And then there's, of course, hotels where people can go. That is another option as long as they are away from the primary zone where we expect this hurricane to hit later tonight.
Gloria, what are authorities saying to people who are digging their toes in and refusing to go?
Well, look, this is a very, very much a reality of life in Florida. This is a place that is used to getting these kinds of storms every year, and there is a bit of reluctance in some parts of the state to leave because people are used to riding storms out. They're used to dealing with the elements. But officials have been very clear. This is not a storm that people can safely ride out depending on where they are. Anyone who is in what we here call the Big Bend area, that northwestern part of the state, anyone who is in that area is in the primary zone of impact. And the storm surge there could be catastrophic. We're talking about water levels that people would not be able to survive. You cannot ride that out.
And that's Gloria Pasmino from CNN there. Wagner mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin has been buried in St. Petersburg. He was killed alongside 9 others last week when their private jet came down after leaving Moscow. We have since heard a lot from people outside of Russia about whether it was a deliberate killing, but not much from ordinary people in the country. The BBC's Russian editor, Steve Rosenberg, has been trying to gauge the mood.
You know, it never fails to astonish me. There can be such drama unfolding in Russia, and yet come onto the streets of Moscow and you really couldn't tell that. I'm in a park close to the Kremlin where people are strolling in the late summer sunshine, and there are kids whizzing by on scooters and lots of Russians taking selfies with St. Basil's Cathedral in the background. It all looks very calm and very relaxed. And yet, this is a country that is currently fighting a war, having attacked and invaded its neighbour, Ukraine. And this is also a country where things happen in the most suspicious of circumstances. And just a few days ago, a private jet crashed 60 miles from here, killing 10 people, including the Russian mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, the man behind the Wagner mutiny. That made headlines around the world. But I wonder what people in Moscow are making of it. I'm not happy or sad about it, says Nina, but I do think Prigozhin only has himself to blame. Then I speak to Ari. Does he believe that the Kremlin was behind the crash?
If the Russian government did it, so it's very bad for them, because he was very helpful for the Russian government.
Was he popular in Russia?
He and his Wagner PMC were like heroes in Russia. He is very, very popular. He said very popular things. He criticized the Russian government, and he said what people wanted to hear from him.
The French countryside has become the setting for increasingly violent attacks by environmental activists against farms and agricultural infrastructure. In one recent incident in the south of the country, activists destroyed several thousand young apple trees after their owner, who had gone organic, switched back to conventional farming. This report from the BBC's John Lawrenson, not far from the town of Lavera.
Farm manager Michael Vieira snaps off an apple tree shoot. That's what they did, he says, 18,000 times. Outside this 3-hectare plot, apples are ripening in the summer heat. But here, where 6 farm workers spent a good part of spring grafting young trees onto rootstock, their work was destroyed in one night by a group of what the French government now calls eco-terrorists.
It makes me really angry. Of course it does. They call themselves environmentalists, but uprooting trees is against nature. Not to mention the cost, the lost production and the work.
2023 has seen a sharp increase in what French environmentalists themselves call Opération Coup de Poing, punch operations. The biggest was at a place called Sainte-Soline in the west of France. where thousands of activists trying to stop farmers building a reservoir fought a pitched battle with thousands of gendarmes. The government banned a group called Earth Uprising after Sainte-Soline, though that ban has now been suspended by the Constitutional Council. Among other recent incidents, militants entered greenhouses and destroyed lily of the valley, accused of using too much water and sand, and lettuces said to be experimental and chemical fertiliser dependent. Back in Lavaux, Mayor Bernard Carayon says a mysterious group calling itself The Thistle that has claimed responsibility for the apple farm attack is typical of a new, very left-wing eco-extremism.
In its communiqué, this group aligns itself with a radical environmentalism that is on the rise in France. It's a political movement that doesn't believe in representative democracy. It treats its adversaries as enemies because they have a different conception of progress.
Back at the apple farm, manager Miquel Vieira speaks Spanish to some seasonal workers who are thinning out the fruit on some of the trees that did not provoke the ire of the eco-warriors. A recent poll shows 85% of French people oppose the sort of direct action increasingly adopted by environmentalists in France, but the eco-radical minority is an active one. Following the ill-fated banning of the Earth Uprising Collective, 180 groups were formed around the country in support of the organisation. This war in the French countryside has perhaps only just begun.
At least 1 million children, At least 1 million children and adults in Australia are living with an eating disorder, but the approach to treating the disease is about to change. The new 10-year strategy on eating disorders has been released and has a strong focus on prevention and treatment in the early stages. The ABC's Elizabeth Cramsey reports.
Audrey was a teenager when she started her battle with an eating disorder.
My family noticed pretty quickly because my behaviour, it was a drastic change in my behaviours. And cognitions and mood.
But getting a diagnosis was a long and arduous process.
It took about 6 months of seeing a multitude of medical professionals before anyone diagnosed me, which was accidental. Ironically, I ate something I was allergic to, went to hospital, and that was the least of their worries, the allergies.
For Audrey's mum, Violetta, it's one of the things she'd like to see change.
I desperately went to lots of different professionals and they didn't want to label her. They said, let's go slowly. But now, having gone through what we've learned is you go fast to actually get treatment. You don't go slowly because the longer you wait, the more entrenched it becomes.
Now there could be a new approach with the release of the latest 10-year strategy on eating disorders. Funded by the federal government and developed by the National Eating Disorders Collaborative, the roadmap was developed through consultation with researchers, clinicians and people with lived experience. Previously, the focus has been on acute-level patient care. That will now shift to prevention and treatment in the early stages. Anna Cullinan is from the Butterfly Foundation. She says the latest strategy is about a comprehensive approach to care.
So really improving the experiences and outcomes of people with or at risk of an eating disorder right through to their treatment and their recovery journey.
Ms Cullinan says now the strategy is in place, funding needs to follow.
We recognise that government funding has gone into the development of the strategy, but we really want to see adequate funding committed to the successful implementation of the strategy over the next 10 years.
Right, before we head off, some final thoughts from you on National's tax policy. Mark says, what if no foreigners want to buy houses in New Zealand? That is a $3 billion hole. It really is crystal ball gazing. No one knows and there is no certainty and no guarantees. This one, 1 Minute National says New Zealand is a mess and people are leaving. Next minute, they are saying it's highly desirable to overseas buyers. Smoke and mirrors, that person reckons. Tomorrow, First Up is going to talk to a Frenchman whose drunken tweet slagging American food got 16 million views overnight. My question is, what is the definition of American food? That is another story.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. National says its plan for a 15% foreign buyer property tax would raise $750 million annually from the sale of fewer than 2,000 luxury homes. Labor has dismissed the costings, which are part of National's tax relief plan to ease the cost of living. Christchurch police fear children competing to steal as many vehicles as possible and then posting footage online is going to lead to a death.